Sometimes it's not the big, flashy moments that change us, but the quiet ones. A stranger's voice, a single act of kindness, a boy with nothing to give but his time and his heart. What happens when a man who has everything is suddenly at the mercy of someone who wants nothing in return? This is a story about more than just a flat tire. It's about pride being disarmed, about wealth being humbled, and about how the smallest gestures can break through the hardest shells. In a world where people often measure worth by titles and possessions, one teenage boy shows us that integrity doesn't come with a price tag, and compassion doesn't check your bank account before reaching out a hand. You may think this is a story about helping someone on the side of the road, but it's so much more than that. Because when the sun scorched the Mississippi sky and a luxury car sat stranded on an empty road, that's when everything began to shift. The sun bore down with a stubborn intensity that only Mississippi summers could muster. The air rippled above the cracked two-lane road, thick with dust and silence, stretching out like it hadn't seen another soul in hours. Nathan Caldwell sat behind the wheel of his luxury black Mercedes, sweat beginning to pool beneath the collar of his linen shirt despite the AC gasping on full blast. The digital display blinked an all-too-familiar warning: low tire pressure. He had felt it minutes earlier, a subtle thump, then the sickening tilt as the rear tire surrendered to the heat and gravel. Nathan was 72, a retired business mogul whose world had once revolved around boardrooms, global calls, and flights on demand. He wasn't used to things going wrong, not like this. Problems in his experience were solved with signatures, transactions, and the right connections. But out here, on a forgotten stretch of country road with no signal bars and no passing cars, none of that mattered. He tapped his Rolex, almost as if willing the time to pass faster, then looked out into the stillness. The only sounds were the low ticking of his engine and the rhythmic buzz of cicadas hidden in the trees. His estate in Jackson felt a world away. This detour had been meant to clear his head, a random drive into the countryside, chasing peace and movement. But now, as the heat thickened and the road remained empty, a small figure began to appear in the distance, walking steadily toward him through the haze. Nathan narrowed his eyes, unsure at first if the figure was real or just a trick of the heat, but with each step it became clearer. Someone was definitely coming. A boy, maybe 13 or 14, with a wiry frame and a calm, even gait. His t-shirt was faded red, hanging a little too loose on his shoulders, and his denim shorts were frayed at the edges. The boy's sneakers, dust-covered and nearly worn through, hit the asphalt in a rhythm that spoke of familiarity with long walks. He didn't appear rushed or alarmed, just steady, like someone following a route he knew by heart. Nathan straightened in his seat, instincts firing from years of corporate caution. The boy stopped a few feet from the car, taking in the flat tire with one glance before meeting Nathan's eyes. "You got a flat, sir?" he asked, his voice strong and sure, with no trace of hesitation. Nathan blinked, caught off guard by the boy's directness. Yes, I do," he replied, adjusting his tone to something more composed. "Was hoping to call for assistance, but there's no signal out here." The boy gave a nod, already walking toward the back of the car. "I can help. My uncle showed me how last summer." He paused, turning slightly. "You got a spare in the trunk?" "I think so," Nathan said, a bit slower now, surprised by the quiet confidence radiating from someone so young. He popped the trunk, stepping out reluctantly into the sweltering heat. The boy moved with purpose, pulling out the jack and tools like he'd done it a dozen times. Nathan stood off to the side, arms crossed, unsure of how to engage. He wasn't used to watching someone else take the lead, especially not a teenager in scuffed shoes. But this boy wasn't asking for permission. He was just helping. And for some reason, Nathan couldn't explain. That unsettled him more than he expected. The work was swift, efficient. The boy crouched low beside the car, bracing the jack with ease and loosening the lug nuts with strong, practiced movements. His fingers were nimble, a little dirty but sure, like they'd done this in worse heat and on tougher days. Nathan hovered nearby, his hands awkwardly clasped behind his back, watching with a strange mix of gratitude and unease. He felt strangely small, not in stature but in presence, as the boy worked silently, steadily, without once needing direction. Within minutes, the spare tire was in place, bolts tightened, the old one propped neatly against the trunk. The boy stood, wiped his palms against his shorts, and stepped back, brushing red clay from his knees. "All done," he said, not with pride, but with quiet finality. Nathan reached instinctively for his wallet, fingers moving with the automatic grace of habit. He pulled out a few crisp bills, 20s, stacked neatly, and held them out. "Here," he said. "Really, thank you. It's the least I can do." But the boy took a single step back, hands raised politely but firmly. "That's kind of you, sir, but I don't need anything." Nathan blinked. Are you sure?" The boy nodded once. "It's just a tire. You needed help, and I was here." The air between them thickened, not with heat but with something unspoken. Nathan was used to negotiations, to exchanges that came with expectations. No one ever did something for nothing, not in his world. But this boy, whose name he didn't even know, had just shifted something deep within him with a simple act and no price tag. As the boy turned and began walking down the road again, same steady pace, same easy rhythm, Nathan stood still, wallet in hand, heart quietly stirred. He didn't know why it mattered so much, but as the boy's figure grew smaller in the distance, he felt it. Something had changed. And he wasn't sure if he could go back to being the same man who had broken down on that road just minutes earlier. Nathan slid back into the driver's seat, the hum of the repaired wheel now a soft reminder of the boy who'd just walked away without taking a thing. He gripped the steering wheel loosely, eyes still lingering on the horizon where the boy had vanished. For a man who had spent decades calculating value down to the decimal, the interaction defied logic, and that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. The road stretched ahead, smooth and unbothered, but Nathan's mind remained fixed somewhere behind him. The boy's voice echoed quietly. "You needed help, and I was here." It wasn't just the words, it was the calm with which they were said, the unshakable steadiness of someone who had nothing to prove. Nathan found himself repeating them silently, like a melody that wouldn't leave his head. He told himself it was a rare act of kindness, something to be appreciated and forgotten, but it didn't feel forgettable. It felt familiar, uncomfortably so. As the miles passed beneath him, old memories surfaced like shadows rising from the corners of a locked room. He remembered being a boy not too different in age, back in rural Arkansas, long before the suits and corner offices. Their old Chevy had broken down on the side of a state highway, his father cursing under his breath, his mother trying to keep him and his sister calm in the back seat. It had been a stranger, an older black man with a weathered face and soft eyes, who'd pulled over and quietly offered a ride. Nathan's father had been too proud to accept at first, but the man had smiled and said, "No one's too good to be helped." That moment had stayed buried for years beneath contracts, acquisitions, and quarterly goals. But now, that boy's dusty sneakers and steady hands had pulled it loose again, like a thread tugging at something long forgotten. And as Nathan approached the city's edge, he realized he wasn't driving home. Not really. He was driving toward a feeling that refused to let go. Sleep came in fragments that night. Nathan tossed beneath his linen sheets the memory of the boy, his calm voice, his quiet refusal, looping through his mind like a film reel with no pause button. By dawn, he was already dressed, coffee growing cold on the counter as he stood by the window, staring out at a world that suddenly felt too quiet, too polished. Something about that brief encounter had lodged beneath his skin, and no amount of logic or wealth could shake it loose. By 7 a.m., he was back in the Mercedes, this time dressed down in jeans and a button-up shirt, the polished air of a businessman replaced by something humbler, more searching. He didn't know exactly where he was going, just south, back toward the road where everything had shifted. He stopped at a gas station first, asking the cashier if they knew a teenage boy who might have been walking that stretch yesterday. The young man behind the counter gave a polite shrug. At a local diner, a waitress paused when he described the boy. "You said he fixed your tire? Wore a red shirt, dusty shoes?" she asked, squinting slightly. "Yes, that's him." "Sounds like Jalen Carter," she said, nodding. "Sweet kid. Lives with his mama near the end of Chestnut Road, just past the big oak tree. House with a green tin roof. It leans a little, but it's still holding on." Nathan repeated the name under his breath, Jalen, as if trying it on for size. There was something steady about it, something that fit. He thanked the woman with a sincerity he hadn't used in years and stepped back out into the heat. He wasn't sure what he would say when he found the boy, only that he needed to see him again, needed to understand why that moment, that simple act, had struck him so deeply. Chestnut Road curved like a lazy question mark through the pines, its edges lined with wild grass and mailboxes that leaned like tired shoulders. Nathan drove slowly, scanning each house for the one with the green tin roof. When he finally saw it, partially shaded by an old oak, its paint weathered, porch sagging just slightly, he parked beneath the tree and sat still for a moment, hands resting on the wheel. The house wasn't grand, but it stood with quiet dignity, like it knew its worth. He stepped out, the heat wrapping around him once more, and made his way up the short path. The porch creaked under his polished loafers, the scent of cut grass and sun-warmed wood thick in the air. He raised his hand and knocked, 3 firm raps that echoed into the silence. Inside, a chair scraped back, followed by soft footfalls. The screen door opened and there she was, a woman in her early 40s, dark-skinned, high cheekbones with a streak of silver in her pulled-back hair. She wore faded jeans and a plain t-shirt, a towel tossed over one shoulder, as though pulled straight from her chores. Her gaze was steady, assessing, not hostile, but not open either. It was the look of someone who'd learned to read people fast, to sort sincerity from pretense. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice calm, measured. Nathan cleared his throat. "Good morning. I believe your son helped me yesterday, out on Route 16. I had a flat tire and he wouldn't accept any payment." Her eyes softened just slightly, and a trace of a smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "That sounds like Jalen," she said, folding her arms loosely. "Always helping folks, even when he's got no business doing it." She studied Nathan again, slower this time. "You came all the way back just to say thank you?" He nodded. "I couldn't stop thinking about it. About him." There was a pause. Then, without a word, she stepped aside and held the door open. "He's out back, fixing the fence. You're welcome to wait, or walk around." Nathan stepped through the doorway into a house that smelled of warm wood and something faintly citrus, like fresh cleaned counters. The air inside was cooler, not from air conditioning but from open windows and a breeze that stirred the edges of faded curtains. As he moved through the narrow hall, he noticed framed photos lining the walls. Jalen as a toddler, grinning in overalls, a graduation picture of a woman he assumed was Jalen's mother, standing beside an older man with proud eyes. On the fridge, drawings hung crookedly, some childlike, others surprisingly detailed, one even showing a cross-section of a house with solar panels and rain barrels drawn in pencil. Following the faint rhythm of hammering, Nathan stepped out the back door into a modest yard bordered by a crooked fence. Jalen stood near the edge holding a plank of wood steady against a leaning post, his brow furrowed in concentration. He didn't look up until Nathan's shadow fell across the grass. "Hey, mister," he said, setting the hammer down and wiping his hands on his shorts. There was no surprise in his tone, just quiet recognition. "You came back?" "I did," Nathan replied, offering a tentative smile. "Hope I'm not interrupting." Jalen shook his head. "Nah, just trying to keep the fence from falling over again. The dogs like to sneak out." Nathan chuckled lightly. Well, it's holding up better than I was yesterday. They stood in companionable silence for a beat, the scent of cut grass and warm earth rising around them. I couldn't stop thinking about what you said, Nathan said at last. About helping just because someone needs it. That's rare. Jalen shrugged, glancing down at the dirt. I don't think it should be. His words settled like a stone in Nathan's chest. Not heavy, but anchoring. And as the breeze picked up again, carrying with it the soft creak of the fence and the quiet steadiness of the boy beside him, Nathan felt something in him begin to shift again. Slow, but certain. From the back door, Monica's voice called out, light but firm. Jalen, come wash up. Lunch is almost ready. Then, seeing Nathan beside her son, she paused, towel still in hand. Her eyes softened again, not entirely surprised to find the two of them standing there like they belonged in the same frame. Would you care to join us? She asked, her tone casual, without decoration. It's nothing fancy, but you're welcome. Nathan hesitated, long enough to realize how rare the invitation was in his world, how unfamiliar it felt to be welcomed without pretense. He nodded. I'd like that, he said, and followed them inside. The kitchen was small, well-worn, lived in. Sunlight filtered through a thin white curtain above the sink, casting soft gold across the countertops. There were mismatched dishes drying on a towel, a mason jar of wildflowers in the center of the table, and a bowl of fresh peaches glistening in their own syrup. Everything was simple, but intentional. Nothing wasted, everything placed with care. Monica moved with quiet efficiency, stirring a pot of greens on the stove, turning off the burner beneath a cast-iron skillet. She didn't fuss or apologize. We don't have much, she said, not as an excuse but a matter of fact. But what we make right. Nathan took his seat, suddenly hyper-aware of his polished shoes and dress watch, the way he seemed too shiny for a room like this. Jalen washed his hands at the sink, humming softly under his breath, then slid into his usual spot at the table with a natural ease. They ate together with no formality, no agenda. Just food and conversation, unfolding gently like a song. Monica spoke of the neighborhood, the elderly neighbor she sometimes cooked for, the church food drive last month, the library that only opened twice a week but always stayed full. Jalen chimed in between bites, talking about school and how he liked building things, especially when math made sense of the mess. Nathan listened more than he spoke, soaking in their rhythm, the warmth, the honesty, the way this small sunlit room somehow felt more real than any place he'd dined in years. And as Monica refilled their glasses with cold sweet tea, he realized something rare. He wasn't in a stranger's home. He was in a space where everything meant something. After the plates were cleared and the room settled into a quieter hum, Nathan turned to Jalen, curiosity finally giving way to something deeper. So, he asked gently, you like building things? Jalen nodded, a shy grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. Yeah, I like figuring out how things fit, how to make something that stays standing, you know? Monica smiled softly from across the table. He's been like that since he was little. Give him cardboard and tape, and you'll have a city on your kitchen floor. Jalen's face flushed, but his voice grew steadier. One time, I drew this house for a school project. It had solar panels, a water catchment system, even ramps for wheelchairs. My teacher said it looked like something real architects design. Nathan raised an eyebrow. Do you want to be one? An architect? Jalen shrugged at first, then nodded with more conviction. Yeah, but I didn't think that was something someone like me really got to do. Not until maybe yesterday. Nathan leaned back slightly, the weight of that sentence settling in. Not until maybe yesterday. He remembered that feeling, when dreams seemed too far for people who didn't grow up with the right name or address. And now, hearing it come from Jalen, it struck him in the chest with a strange blend of ache and awe. You've got a gift, Nathan said finally, voice low but firm. "And people with gifts like that, they don't always know they're allowed to use them, but I'm telling you, you are." Jalen didn't answer right away. He just nodded slowly, his eyes bright but unsure, like someone trying to believe in something for the first time. And in that quiet moment between two generations, something unseen passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or the early roots of trust. Outside, the cicadas kept singing, but inside, a boy's dream had just been spoken aloud, and that, Nathan knew, made it more real than ever. That night, Nathan sat alone in the corner of his sprawling home, a glass of untouched bourbon resting beside him and the hush of central air whispering through the vents. Everything was in place, spotless, curated, efficient. But for the first time, it all felt painfully hollow. The chairs no one sat in, the paintings no one looked at. The silence that had once brought him peace now pressed against his chest like a weight. He couldn't stop thinking about the blueprint sketch on Jalen's fridge, about the boy's quiet certainty when he talked about ramps and solar panels, like the future was something he could not only imagine, but build. Nathan had built plenty in his life: corporations, investments, high-rise towers with names etched in steel. But he couldn't remember the last time anything he'd created had made someone feel possible. By morning, he had a list, names of old colleagues, numbers he hadn't dialed in years. He called one in Atlanta, someone who owed him a favor, and asked for recommendations on small construction crews near Chestnut. Another call to a friend at a youth nonprofit brought up a summer program still accepting late applications, introductory architecture and sustainable design, right in the city. Then came the call to a contractor he trusted. "I'm not flipping a house," he said. "I'm doing something personal, quiet, no press, no big reveal, just the right thing." By noon, the wheels were in motion. And by 3 o'clock, Nathan was back behind the wheel of his Mercedes, this time driving with purpose, not away from something, but toward it. The road was the same, but the man holding the steering wheel wasn't. His hands were lighter, his eyes sharper. He wasn't chasing peace anymore. He was chasing a promise, and with each mile that promise began to take shape, not in numbers or net worth, but in the way a single act of kindness could ripple into something far greater than either of them had expected. 2 days later, a white utility van pulled up in front of the Carter house just as the morning sun split through the trees. Out stepped two men, Leo and Jorge, carrying toolboxes and rolled blueprints, their boots crunching softly against the gravel drive. Nathan was already there, standing near the porch in rolled sleeves and worn-in shoes, clipboard in hand, the brim of his ball cap casting a shadow over his face. Monica stepped outside, arms folded, brow furrowed as she took in the scene, paint cans being unloaded, measuring tape snapping into place, a soft beep as the van reversed into the yard. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice cautious, protective. Nathan turned toward her, his expression calm but unwavering. "It's not a donation," he said, "and it's not charity. It's gratitude." She blinked. "Gratitude?" "Your son reminded me of who I used to be," he said. "Before all the noise, before the deals and the titles. I came to repay a debt, not in dollars, but in action." Monica's eyes searched his face, unsure whether to believe it. "We've made it this far on our own." "I know," Nathan said gently. "You've done more than manage. You've built something strong, but even strong things deserve help sometimes." Just then, Jalen appeared beside his mother, wide-eyed as he watched the men begin to measure the porch and inspect the roofline. "Are they fixing the house?" he asked, barely above a whisper. Nathan crouched slightly, meeting the boy's gaze. "Not just the house," he said. "A new roof, insulation, a safe porch, and there's more." Jalen tilted his head. "There's a summer program in Atlanta. Architecture, design. I've reserved you a spot. Full scholarship." Jalen stared, stunned into silence. "But that's a lot." "You earned it," Nathan replied, "with nothing more than your hands, your heart, and the way you showed up when no one asked you to." Monica said nothing for a long moment. Then, with a quiet breath, she stepped forward and offered a single nod. "If we do this," she said, "we help too." By sunrise the next morning, Jalen was already out front, broom in hand, clearing the porch of leaves and loose nails. His oversized tool belt, gifted by Jorge, hung low on his narrow hips, most of the pouches still too big, but he wore it with a quiet pride, like it meant something more than just tools. As the crew arrived, he greeted them one by one, watching their every move with the sharp eyes of someone who wasn't just curious. He was absorbing. Leo showed him how to snap a chalk line across uneven wood. Jorge explained the difference between structural beams and decorative trim. Jalen listened with both ears and all his attention, nodding slowly, asking questions when something didn't click right away. And when it did, he lit up, not with the wild joy of a child, but the deep satisfaction of someone discovering where they belong. By the end of that first day, his hands were smudged with graphite and sawdust, and there was a new sketch folded into his back pocket, his own version of a window frame design they had discussed over lunch. Jorge took one look and raised an eyebrow. "This kid's got the eye," he muttered to Leo, who only grinned in agreement. Jalen didn't just follow instructions, he anticipated them. He began measuring twice without being told, learning how to read elevation levels and how to hold a nail gun steady. Every line drawn on a blueprint was an invitation, and he treated it like a map to something bigger than a house. After the crew packed up for the evening, Jalen stayed behind, sweeping debris into neat piles and tracing his fingers along the new framework like he was already imagining what would come next. Nathan watched from the porch, the boy silhouetted against the sinking sun. He wasn't just learning construction, he was learning belief, one nail, one question, one sketch at a time. As the days passed and the hum of hammers became a familiar song on Chestnut Road, something unexpected began to ripple outward from the Carter house. Neighbors slowed their walks to watch the progress, first out of curiosity, then out of admiration. Some brought by mason jars of sweet tea or slices of pie wrapped in foil. Others showed up with rakes and gloves, quietly stepping in where they saw a need. One woman from 2 doors down arrived with a basket of collard greens, placing it on the porch without a word. A retired mechanic offered to sharpen the crew's tools. Even the kids, normally scattered between front yards and screen doors, began showing up, drawn in by the rhythm of something being built. Jalen welcomed them all, naturally assuming the role of quiet leader. He handed younger kids spare nails to sort, showed them how to hold a measuring tape, taught them how to mark clean lines on raw wood. He didn't bark orders. He shared what he was learning, his excitement contagious. Jorge started calling him Foreman Jalen, always with a half grin, and Leo began deferring to him on small layout tweaks, chuckling each time the boy nailed a measurement down to the 1/8 of an inch. Nathan stood off to the side more often now, watching rather than directing. He saw how people leaned in when Jalen spoke, how his presence made others stand taller. The boy's influence wasn't loud, but it was undeniable, like a current moving just beneath the surface. For the first time in years, Nathan felt something he hadn't even realized he'd missed: community. Not the curated kind behind gates and golf clubs, but the kind built with hands and heart and shared purpose. And as laughter began to replace silence around the house, he realized they weren't just fixing up a home. They were raising something far more powerful. Hope, nailed into the beams, poured into the soil, passed hand to hand. Nathan had always been a planner. Spreadsheets, forecasts, 5-year projections, those were his language. But this was different. There were no graphs for the way his chest tightened watching Jalen sketch out ideas in the dirt with a stick, no formula for the feeling that rose when he saw the boy teaching others with the same calm confidence that had first stopped him on the side of the road. He started carrying a small notebook in the glove box of his car, scribbling thoughts between visits, questions about how to build something lasting, something that didn't end when the last nail went in. The idea came slowly, then all at once. He would create a foundation. Not for charity, but for investment, in kids like Jalen, in talent hidden behind economic hardship, in hands that already knew how to build but just needed someone to believe they were allowed to. He called it the Carter Initiative, after the boy who unknowingly woke up a part of him long dormant. It would fund technical education programs, summer workshops, apprenticeships for youth in under-resourced communities. He'd start with construction and sustainable design, fields that had shaped both Jalen's dreams and his own rediscovered purpose. He hadn't told Monica or Jalen yet. It wasn't ready, not officially, but the paperwork had been filed, the first check signed, the board forming quietly with people he trusted. It was happening, not in a blaze of headlines, but in steady, intentional steps. Every time Nathan left Chestnut Road, he felt the pull to return, not out of obligation, but out of something deeper. The house had become more than a renovation project. It was the birthplace of an idea, seated in kindness and built by belief. And the best part was, this was just the beginning. The mansion in Jackson had never looked smaller. Nathan stood in the foyer that evening, staring at the marble floor that gleamed too perfectly, the chandelier that sparkled too coldly. Everything was polished, symmetrical, lifeless. For years, this house had been a sanctuary, a retreat from noise, from people, from imperfection. But now, all he could see were the things it lacked. He walked through the room slowly, as if seeing them for the first time. The walls were lined with curated art he hadn't truly looked at in years. The dining table, long and grand, hadn't hosted laughter in a decade. Even the kitchen with its chrome appliances and silent countertops felt sterile. There was no scent of Green's cooking, no humming at the sink, no mismatched dishes left out to dry. Just quiet. Too much of it. He sat at the table and stared at the breakfast his housekeeper had left. Fluffy eggs, multigrain toast, a perfectly brewed cup of coffee. It was everything he had once considered success. But now it felt absurdly hollow. He pushed the plate away untouched. What echoed in his mind wasn't a boardroom or a deal. It was Jalen's voice talking about designing homes people could actually live in. It was Monica's quiet strength as she moved through her kitchen. It was the sound of kids laughing while sweeping sawdust from a patch of dirt they'd claimed as their own. The Carter house hadn't just reopened something in him. It had revealed what had been missing all along: warmth, purpose, human messiness. Life. He didn't belong in this echo chamber of perfection anymore, and he didn't want to. His hands itched not for paperwork, but for lumber, for blueprints, for shared meals and early mornings where people showed up not because they were paid to, but because it mattered. And he knew, deep down, that his place was shifting, away from this marble floor and back toward a porch that still leaned just a little, but stood for something far greater. Late Friday afternoon, after the crew had packed up early for the weekend and the yard had settled into a soft, golden hush, Nathan found himself alone on the new porch, a mason jar of sweet tea resting against his palm. The boards beneath him were level now, freshly sealed, but still creaked in a way that felt honest, like they remembered what it took to stand upright. Inside, Monica and Jalen moved quietly through the house. Jalen had just shown her a new sketch, his most detailed yet. Skylights, wide ramps, solar panels, a full wraparound porch. A bathroom redesigned with accessibility in mind. He had thought about everything, not just beauty, but function, dignity. Nathan took a slow sip of tea as the door creaked open and Jalen stepped out. Sketchbook clutched close to his chest like it held something sacred. He dropped into the chair beside Nathan, flipping open to a clean page, pencil poised. "I've been thinking," Jalen said, eyes on the paper. "One day, I'm going to design houses like this one, but better. Lots of them. For people who never thought they could have something like this." Nathan turned to look at him, his voice quieter than usual. "You will," he said. "I have no doubt." The boy didn't respond. He just began to draw, hand moving in smooth, confident strokes, each line carving out a dream with real edges and foundation. Nathan didn't speak again, didn't want to interrupt what was unfolding. He simply watched. The sun dipped lower, casting amber light across the yard, the trees, the porch where two lives now sat side by side. One just beginning, the other starting again. There was no grand ending. No applause or headlines, just a boy with a pencil, a man with his hands open, and a porch built not only of wood, but of trust, belief, and quiet redemption. And in that stillness, Nathan understood. The future didn't arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it sat down beside you, pencil in hand, and built itself, one steady line at a time. In the end, it wasn't the new porch or the fixed roof that stayed with Nathan. It was the look in Jalen's eyes when he spoke of building real homes, not just houses. It was the steadiness in a boy who'd never known luxury, and the grace in a mother who'd built a life out of quiet strength. The story reminds us that kindness is never small, not when it's offered freely, without agenda. Jalen didn't need a stage. He didn't need recognition. He simply saw someone who needed help, and chose to act. And that choice, that one simple act, didn't just fix a tire. It restored a man's memory of who he used to be. It sparked a ripple that would go on to impact dozens, maybe hundreds, of other lives through the Carter Initiative. The truth is, we never know how far our kindness will reach, but it always goes further than we think. If this story moved you, even just a little, we hope you'll help us keep sharing more stories that matter. Click that like button, leave a comment about what touched you most, and hit subscribe so you never miss a story that speaks to the heart. And if someone in your life could use a reminder of the power of doing good, share this video with them. You never know who might be changed by it.